Hi everyone, Attorney Jeff Forte from Forte Law Group. We are now about 5 weeks in to school closures as a result of the coronavirus. And there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of questions that still need to be answered, okay? Hopefully this video will provide a little bit of an overview for you. So there's 550,000 students that are currently enrolled across Connecticut's 200 school districts, okay? And there are over 80,000 students with disabilities that receive a special education program, all right? Now, for many of these families that have children with a disability, school closures are interrupting their child's special education and related service hours that are stated on their child's IEP, all right? Essential services such as small group or one-on-one instruction, paraprofessional support, daily counseling, physical therapy, academic tutoring, speech and language therapy, and behavioral and or psychological support services are not practically being delivered with fidelity through the use of a computer screen, despite the best efforts that are being made by school teachers and school clinicians statewide, okay? Given the suddenness of the school closures and the economic impact of parents losing their jobs and the lack of technology that teachers and parents and students are now facing, it is difficult to remotely educate some of our students with the most significant disabilities. And as the school closure time period continues, as of today, it's continuing till May 20th, but it may actually go beyond that, right? So too does the gap widen for our special education students and their services that they should be receiving. So as parents and teachers and administrators, and as school districts alike, now is the time that we need to collaborate and candidly agree that the question is not going to be whether students with disabilities have educationally regressed, but rather to what extent our students are regressing and how we will remediate their education. Parents and educators alike need to be collecting data on their child's education in order to compare their present levels of performance within their IEP to that of the student's educational level during this remote learning time period. Now, to that end, there will be a need for compensatory education for our most vulnerable students with disabilities, okay? Now, to be certain, on March 20th of this year, the U.S. Department of Education, and I'll link it within this video blog, the U.S. Department of Education issued guidance to states on federal education laws. And that guidance includes their interpretation of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA, that as a result of school closures caused by the corona outbreak, all right, and the relevant guidance as to the issue of what education is required for students with disabilities during the coronavirus pandemic, the U.S. Department of Ed stated, and it's a quote, it's rather long, if a local education agency continues to provide educational opportunities to the general education population, okay, to the neurotypical students, general ed population, by way of example, providing online learning or alternative learning measures during the school closure crisis. The school must also ensure that students with disabilities also have equal access to the same opportunities, including the provisions of a free, appropriate public education, otherwise known as FAPE, according to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, okay? and that it is the responsibility that schools must ensure to the greatest extent possible, that's the language, that each child with a disability be provided with the special education and related services identified in the student's individualized education program developed, okay, to the greatest extent possible, okay? So the roadmap to be remotely educating our students is the services contained within the student's IEP to the greatest extent possible. The guidance goes on to state that if a child does not receive services during the school closure crisis, a child's IEP team or the appropriate personnel under a 504 team must make an individualized determination as to whether and to what extent compensatory services will be needed, consistent with the applicable requirements, including the makeup for any skills that may have been lost. That is the guidance from the U.S. Department of Education that is guiding our school districts on a local level with the school closures. Okay. Now, it's important to understand how that is interpreted. The key takeaways from this guidance are two parts. All right, twofold. First, children with disabilities need to be provided with special education and related services within the child's IEP to the greatest extent possible. Second, compensatory services may be needed to make up for any skills that may have been lost during this time period, okay? During the time period that schools are closed. No doubt that many service hours of ambitious and meaningful learning have been lost during the school closure period. And this is, look, despite the very best intentions, admirable intentions of school districts and of teachers. But remediation efforts and compensatory education will be required, okay, in order for some students with disabilities to get back on track to the level where they left off before schools closed, in order to help close the educational gap, okay? Now, what is compensatory education? Often referred to as comp ed. It's a legal term that's used as a means to make a student whole for education, for past educational deprivation. And it is an equitable form of reimbursement that is applied when a school district has not provided a student with the right to receive a free appropriate public education, otherwise known as FAPE. Now, the concept is to place the student in a position that he or she would have been in had there not been a denial of FAPE under the IDEA. Okay? Comp ed, to be sure, it's not a, it's not a pocket of money. It's not a cash payout. It's not a monetary award that one would typically receive, for example, if they were in a civil lawsuit. Instead, compensatory education serves as the appropriate remedy to fund permissible educational services for a child for educational time that was lost. And what are those permissible examples? Tutoring, therapy, evaluations, assessments, related services that were lost or that were not delivered during a certain time period. Okay. Now, generally speaking, the amount of compensatory education is usually valued in one of two ways, quantitatively or qualitatively. The quantitative approach is determined by numerical data, such as counting the number of service hours on a child's IEP that have not been provided or implemented during a certain finite amount of time. Okay? The qualitative approach is less about counting hours and numbers and more about gaining insight and information, such as determining a student's baseline or present levels of performance through the use of various assessments and measurements in order to determine where the student is now compared to the present levels of performance in the child's operative IEP before school closure. And you will more fully plan a comprehensive plan to more appropriately educate and minimize and hopefully reverse the student's academic or cognitive regression. Regardless of what approach is applied, though, it's important for parents to understand that empirical evidence, such as data collection and the documentation of their child's daily routine during this school closure period, will be incredibly useful to share with your school's team when you go to make your request for remediation time and or compensatory services. And moreover, parents should be requesting that their child get reevaluated by the school team in order to best determine what is the child's current level of educational performance once we get back into school. Lastly, parents and school teams are strongly encouraged to be working together collaboratively during this school closure time, okay, to determine what amount of services their child can be receiving and what they cannot be receiving, okay? This process is unique and personal to the needs of each child. And this will eventually help you with your school team determine what type of hours or services your child is going to need by way of remediation or compensatory education in the future to help your child get back on track to their present levels of performance. Now, also, we've created at my firm a daily data collection sheet in which you can certainly use, and I encourage you to download it, take a look at it, and use that. We've also developed one on the Seek of Connecticut webpage. Lastly, I'm also doing a free podcast every week at Let's Talk Sped Law if you'd like to get more information. Thanks for watching.